Video is going to be about coronavirus as it applies to question 1 and 2 final exam. For question 3, you can refer back to the a video I did a week ago and is linked in the document. Not much has changed on that one. Okay, question 1 is describe the strengths and weaknesses of federalism in a time of coronavirus. You will want to define the term federalism and devolution. Discuss the role of the federal, state, and local government under federalism. Then look at the strengths and weaknesses of the concept during a pandemic. Conclude with a projection about how the concept of federalism will impact the post-pandemic recovery efforts. Refer to the video I did a couple of weeks ago outlining how to talk about federalism, devolution, and things like that. I'll be updating in terms of what has happened this year. The second question is, the states are called the laboratory of democracy. How has the ability of states to set their own policy shaped the course of the disease in their state from February 15th to May 1st? Which states were more successful and which states had more trouble dealing with the pandemic? Give examples from at least 5 states. Okay, so for question 1, the important thing is to frame the larger question about federalism using examples from right now. And so the bulk of the question is focusing on federalism, how it works, and then using examples to support your overall theory. You can use outside research, and all of the outside research can be what you did in question 2. But this question itself is more about federalism and ideology than anything that's going on right now. Anything you do now is to support that larger argument. And just I'm skipping down a line, but you might want to answer question 2 before you answer question 1, because then you've done the coronavirus research in the kind of depth that you're going to need to do to answer 2, and you can just have that spill over for question 1. Okay, it's very important. This is an analysis essay. That means it's your opinion supported from data and other kinds of sources. This is not a instance where it's a just facts, ma'am. I want you to make an argument about federalism. Question 2. In question 2, again, you're framing the large question as states as the laboratory of democracy. Refer back to the video a couple of weeks ago to discuss what we mean by laboratory of democracy, in terms of how the states have responded. And this is really separate from the federalism question. You aren't going to spend so much time kind of defining laboratories of democracy as you are going to spend, doing a quick 1 or 2 sentence definition and then supporting the different kinds of experiments that have been done across 5 different states. You will have to use outside sources to complete this assignment, and I'll tell you what those sources are in a bit. But the first thing you've got to do on this question is to figure out what success looks like. What does it mean to successfully responded to coronavirus? And there are a number of different ways that you can determine success, and it's really important that when you're doing this, you define what success looks like, or what more successful than other states looks like, what more difficulties, what more failures that other states have. So, and we realize this is a continuum. No state has done 100%. No state has done 0%. But how you define success will often determine what success looks like. So, for instance, you can look at the fewest deaths overall. I think right now Montana has 1 death. So is Montana the most successful, or is there something else going on to look at? Another way to look at this is fewest deaths by population. So if you divide the number of deaths by the total state population, you get the number of deaths by population. As a hint, when I posted this video, I posted a link on the page to a page where it lists all of the deaths and the deaths by population. Another way to look at this is deaths by date of first case. So of course this shows up in Washington and California very, very early, and it's just now showing up for places like Montana. And West Virginia, I think, was the last state in the country to have a case. And so they obviously got started later, and they're on a different curve. And so when you look at it, you might want to look at a specific date and then look at a bunch of, what's happening, 10 days after first case, 15 days after first case, and compare. That way you're comparing apples to apples. Um, Another thing is, are you gaining economic and emotional support in Washington? And by emotional support, I mean Trump support in views of tweets and things like that. Is success being able to navigate the federal system so that you get the resources you need? And we do know that both in terms of congressional appropriations and then presidential releasing of those funds, how states have handled their lobbying and their flattery and things like that matter. So you can find success as getting the most resources from Washington or having problems getting resources from Washington. Another thing you can look at is how popular is the governor. Is the state successful when the people support what the governor is doing? And in this respect, there's some states that are doing what we would consider a fairly good job if you look at like deaths overall or deaths by population, but they're having an incredibly difficult time bringing their state along with them. There are other states that are actually not doing a whole lot in terms of response. They're relaxing the responses quickly, even though they've got higher death rates at this point than other states do. They're still having the support of the population. And then another thing that you can evaluate is learning from the places around you. If you got hit later, are you doing the kinds of things that the states that got hit earlier wish that they had done? If you are a state that got hit early, are you looking at what like Italy and China did in terms of best practices? And so those are different criteria. Pick one of them and show how the states respond differently, illustrating the concept of laboratory of democracy. Okay, how do you find success? Using these videos, this one and the ones I posted a couple of weeks ago, you can do that. You can also use the links that I provided, and that's on the sheet with this. And then you can go out and do, especially for question 2, a little bit of individual research. You do not have to, read 27 sources to get this. You can look at federal government sites like the Centers for Disease Control. You can look at state and government sites. Primarily, you're going to be looking at the health sites for state and local governments. You can look at national news. These are papers that cover, while they may have some local emphasis in part, many of their stories cover a national kind of perspective, and you'll be able to get kind of a sense of what's going on in all 50 states from these national papers. But then once you pick your states, you can look at the major papers in those states. So the major papers in California are things like the LA Times, San Francisco Examiner, and Sacramento Bee. You don't have to use these 3. There are, in California, we have a half dozen or a dozen major papers. If you're looking specifically at some of the smaller areas, you can look at the Riverside Press Enterprise, or the papers up in Lodi or things like that. But we're mostly looking at state level responses, and so you'll want the big papers in the state. The other thing, so for Ohio, the big papers are things like the Cleveland Plain Dealer, the Columbus Dispatch, etc. So find those big papers, and you can use them as sources. The national news, the New York Times and the Washington Post, will cover the New York state and the Washington metropolitan area things as local news. So if you're choosing those, you can just stick with the big national papers. Okay, what's your grade going to be based on? One is your framing. Do you understand the concept of federalism? Do you understand the concept of laboratory of democracy? Then probably the bulk of it is your analysis. Having used these terms, how are you applying them to an actual urgent problem in the states? Writing quality matters, as many of you will work in the public sector, and a lot of what you do in the public sector is write reports. And so the ability to communicate well, and this doesn't just mean grammatically correct, it means forming sentences that get your idea apart. And then you will probably need some outside sources, but I don't want you to feel like you have to write a full American Psychological Association AMA or Modern Language Association, you do not need a full bibliography. Instead, you can just say, according to our textbook, federalism is, or according to the lecture notes on February 14th. If you're citing a media or a website, you'll say things like in the Washington Post article on April 29th, George Will said, or according to the CDC website, blah, blah, blah. So you're giving credit, you're giving attribution, but you're not, this isn't as rigorous as a term paper is. This is a final exam. So I hope that helps. If you have any questions, please email me, get on the Zoom chats, etc.